Dear colleagues, welcome here this evening. This is quite possible the last meeting of the External Affairs Committee for this electoral term. But although the foreign ministers haven't excluded that, given what's going on in Ukraine, quite possibly there might be another European summit on the cards. So we may, in the light of that, have to meet again. But in any case, as we heard in plenary, we as a European Parliament, given the danger from Russia, can't just say willy-nilly we'll have a recess for 2.5 months. We have to be aware of that, and I reserve the option of perhaps having another meeting called. So I would suggest to you that, given the time it is, we very quickly look at 4, unless there are any comments on the agenda. I think the minutes are approved, unless there are any problems with that. No? Okay. The agenda is adopted then. And I'm very pleased that today we've got a lady colleague from Venezuela.
María Corina Machado, member of the Venezuelan National Assembly, and Mrs. Claudia Gurisatti, General Director of NTN 24, an international news network, who will inform us about the latest developments in Venezuela. As you know, violence erupted in the country last February when university students demonstrated against soaring crime. Security forces brutally put down the initial protest, which led university students across the country to take to the streets. This wave of violence has left a balance of 41 deaths, 550 injured, and more than 2,000 detainees so far. Venezuela has one of the highest murder rates in the world, and fundamental rights such as the right of freedom to freedom of expression, association, assembly are being seriously undermined. Furthermore, it faces a dismal economic outlook. It has the highest inflation rate in the region at 56.2% in 2013 and is also beset by frequent shortages of basic goods. Last week, Venezuelan President Nicolás Maduro met with some of his political rivals for the first time in talks sponsored by UNISA. Nevertheless, while the encounter allowed an unusual open platform to speak directly to the President, it was also notable for the absence of some important opposition leaders, such as one of our guests today, Ms. María Corina Machado, who refused to participate in the talks until as long as repression exists. Dear guests, before passing the floor to you, I would like to ask you what are your impressions of these talks and what are your prospects for Venezuela to come back to normality in the near future. I would also like to ask your views on what could the EU do to help Venezuela overcome the current situation of violence and social unrest. Perhaps Ms. Corina Machado will take the floor. Thank you.
Buenas tardes, señor.
Well, good evening all, Chairman. Dear colleagues, it is an honor for me to be here with you today, representing the Venezuelan people, and to demonstrate that they're fighting for democracy and freedom, and we're not alone. That democracy in the world looks to and has hand in hand with the people who are fighting for democracy in Venezuela in our daily lives. There are 3 messages which I'd like to get over, if I may, this evening. First, I'd like to thank the European Parliament for its ongoing support to democracy, defending human rights in Latin America and in Venezuela. There have been all sorts of resolutions from this committee over the last few years. May 1, 2007, on the imminent closure of the TV station then. 2008, 2009, there were resolutions, 2010, 2012, and most recent, February of this year. You mentioned that yourself, Chairman, and that rang the warning bells on systematic, huge infringements of human rights and called for respecting the right of freedom of expression and freedom to carry out politics in the normal way. So also we thought of getting an ad hoc committee coming over to Venezuela to assess themselves what's going on. And since then, and this is the second point which I'd like to mention to you, is a situation where there's persecution, as I said, repression, torture in Venezuela. That's got worse. You also mentioned a figure, which I'll look at later on. It's a very painful situation for the Venezuelan people at the moment. They are going through extreme anxiety, and we are really concerned that violence is soon going to snowball to unprecedented proportions. And the other thing which is important, I want to assure you of this evening, is that Venezuelans of our generation, we are committed to fighting for transition, peaceful transition, in the framework of our constitution, to make sure that we restore democracy, respect of human rights in the constitution in our country. I think you asked, and I was listening to what you were saying about our country. How could Venezuela get to this sorry state? It's got all these oil reserves, the largest on the planet, in fact. 15 years ago, the price of oil was 9. And now it's over 100. So given that huge increase, how could we have these economic vicissitudes? The highest inflation rate in the world, and 68% for foodstuffs per year. That's the estimate. 30% general lack of foodstuffs. Women queuing a huge amount of hours to buy basic foodstuffs and medicines, and going to the markets in queues, sort of have a little mark put on their arm to mark their place, as though they were just beasts of burden. The latest estimates, 700% devaluation, and people get $60 per month. In it's 169 bolivars per day. One tin of tuna is 120 bolivars. So how can you feed people with those sorts of food prices? We're having got here. And if you add the breaking of social cohesion, plus violence, the ongoing debate of splitting of society for all sorts of reasons, ideological, racial, cultural, generational reasons, economic reasons, we can see a society which is overwhelmed by violence. It's almost as if it were at war. 79 murders for every 100,000 inhabitants. It's the highest murder rate that there is. It's a country at war. How did it happen? Well, it was the upshot of years of deinstitutionalization. The most painful and concerning situation is that of the general institution of justice. It's not just a question of poverty. Justice is really trodden down by the executive. Immunity for murder, which is recognized by the public prosecutors, 98%. So, I mean, who are they killing now? The youngest people, the poorest levels of society. One every 20 minutes is murdered. One of the worst indicated internationally. About 178 countries assessed there. We are 160 there. What a murder rate. Now, freedom of expression, freedom of opinion. I know my colleague will mention this, but I won't go into that in great detail. But we've got to unforeseeable extremes. To say something is heroic, not just on television, radio, etc., but there's a huge amount of persecution against the journalists. It's brutal. 118 cases of journalists complaining of having been attacked every month. Also, questions of civil servants. Civil servants in Venezuela would not put their heads above the parapet, would not allow anybody to suspect that they are not 100% loyal to the regime. Were they to do that, they'd lose their job and possibly their lives. Last week, I was in Brazil. There'd been an invitation to go to a congress there. We got in the plane. I mentioned a civil servant, one from the central bank and the other from the National Oil Company. Well, they got hold of me, grabbed my arms, weeping, and said, look, what you don't understand, you don't really realize that we, the civil servants, were paying the political price. We cannot even think of in any way which is distinct from that of the regime if we want to maintain our lives and our family. In 2014, the world thought that Venezuela was just resigned to terrorism, being terrorized. The way in which institutional life just enclosed itself, circled the wagons. I mean, we were just sort of closing in on ourselves, but then people decided they would fight for dignity, human dignity and justice. An appeal went out from our consciences and our hearts saying we should have civil demonstrations peacefully, and that was the start of the civic movement, Pacific Citizens Movement. It's the most significant one in our whole history. That is unparalleled, because that covered the whole country, cities, everywhere. Young people, old, rich, poor, whatever color of skin, men, women, etc. Everybody was in there. In fact, the women were very active, right in the forefront. But I think we have overcome protest. I mean, we talked about social claims, economic claims, but we've gone beyond that, looking at human values for dignity, for justice, so that young people feel that they can have a future in their country, so that mothers can feel that children are not just going to be murdered, and that fathers can have the hope of giving a worthy life to their family. The response of the regime was brutal. You described it, real repression. We didn't see that under the military dictatorships in the 20th century, even to that extent. A repression which included not just the usage of paramilitaries under the regime, but groups of members of our armed forces and security forces and our intelligence assets. There's now 2,338 political prisons, 24 have died. There are more than 60 cases of very serious torture, electric shock treatment, people covered in petrol set fire to, people bastinadoed, psychological torture as well, the most brutal thing that you could possibly think of. Many of these young people complained, lodged complaints, but they're kept in barracks, and that's where the courts were. The so-called courts tried them, and they were very brave, given that, to complain. But these have to be included with the cases you mentioned. There are lack of foodstuffs, forced detention. Leopoldo Lopez, who was killed in some barracks, and two mayors who were legitimately elected by a decision of the Constitutional Court. Unconstitutionally, the Constitutional Court made themselves a criminal court, and they judged these mayors for not stopping the complaints and the demonstrations in their municipalities. And so they called for new elections on 25th of May. And that has infringed popular sovereignty. It happened to me too. Just a couple of minutes to tell you what happened to me, perhaps. I'm a national MP, elected in 2010, the highest turnout of votes which had ever happened nationally as it occurred up until then. But I mean, I've seen all sorts of crimes. And the regime is trying to find an excuse to just boot me out of Parliament. I'm under ongoing permanent threat. A little less than a month ago, I was invited by the Standing Council of Latin American States to explain what's going on by way of violence and infringement of human rights within that organization. There's a majority of countries said that they would want to take it off the agenda. Panama used a wheeze, though, which allowed me to actually speak. And Mr. Cabello, who's Speaker of the National Assembly, decided that I was no longer a member, and therefore I was no longer MP, and couldn't represent Venezuela in the national parliament. So that was a way of silencing me, and I couldn't defend myself. I wasn't able to speak to the Parliament before I was stripped of my powers, nor in the Supreme Court, as should be the case under the Venezuelan Constitution. I was stripped of my credentials, and I was forced out, and then by force not allowed to have access to the hemicycle. If you look at Article 200 of the Constitution, the member has parliamentary immunity. That is to say, before being a judge, has a right to be able to put the case to the Supreme Court of the land. And on the basis of that, Parliament then itself would vote whether the member should stay as an MP or not. And the Speaker of the National Parliament himself cannot just say, right, you're out. There's no constitutional right for that person to, by force, exclude a member from Parliament. Actually, that's what they did to me. Now they're accusing me of treason against our fatherland. I'm generally oppressed, my family as a whole, and I am followed by the political police day and night. So I just want to tell you that in Venezuela there is an implacable regime. So the question is, if the powers are not autonomous, if there's not if there's infringement of the Constitution, if there's not the rule of law, and nobody has any rights, and if Parliament is just a sort of sock puppet and gets orders from the executive, and a member is just by force excluded, I mean, what could you call that? How could you? What do you call a regime where you say there can be no peaceful demonstration? If you torture people, if you murder citizens, and if censorship is imposed on the media, what's the name for that sort of regime? Well, there's one word for it, it's dictatorship. And the Democrats of the world have to call a spade a spade. A dictatorship is a dictatorship. But let me say to you now, just to wind up, that in Venezuela, the dictatorial system is just that. But democracy is more alive than ever despite that, because democracy lives in the hearts and awareness of all citizens. We're fighting in the street. Young people who give a huge example of what should be done. And finally, we are looking to transition to democracy which is peaceful in the framework of the Constitution, a political solution to the drama we're going through, using the levers and buttons which we have under the Constitution. But your help has been long-going and helpful. I think if you're involved in international politics, a genuine dialogue is what is necessary to have any solution of equity. We need to have peace and dialogue, not repression. Because what's happening now, students are being attacked, trade unions are being attacked, also just housewives. So people being imprisoned in military barracks. That is not justice. So fine off, once again, in the name of the Venezuelans, to say thank you. To be here for me is living proof that we're not alone. It's something which generates strength, emits strength. And I'd just like to say thank you. That's the point in the resolution of the 27th of February last, when you talked about sending a delegation, an ad hoc delegation. That is an important point. I remind you of that, so that with your own hearts and eyes can sense the pain of the Venezuelans, but also sense the hope, the strength to fight which exists in my country at the moment until we conquer our enemies and get to justice and freedom. Thank you.
Herzlichen Dank.
Thank you very much for that portrayal of the situation. I'll give the floor now to Mrs. Gurisatti. If you could try to be a little bit briefer so that we have a bit of time for discussion afterwards, and with that I'll give you the floor.
Muchas gracias, señor presidente de la Comisión de Asuntos.
Thank you very much, Chairman of the Foreign Affairs Committee of the European Parliament. Members, ladies and gentlemen, and representative of the Venezuelan Parliament. You were voted for by Venezuelan people, so we continue to consider you a Venezuelan MP. Thank you for being here with us today. I can try to be brief. Journalists tend to cut through swathes of text, so I hope I can do the same today. I come from NTN 24. It's an international Spanish language news channel. So I'm speaking on behalf of the channel and of the 170 members of staff there. So I'd like to thank you for opening up the space to us to allow us to speak. I'm going to talk about Venezuela and some of the cases that we've covered as journalists. It's an honor for us to be here, precisely because you represent the daily functioning of democracy. Here in the European Parliament, all political streams and ideological schools live alongside each other. All the different ways of thinking live together peacefully. You have a style of discussion that is peaceful. Yes, it can be tough, but it's peaceful. Let me give you an example. María Corina Machado, when she was an MP about a year ago, was smacked in the nose because somebody didn't agree with what she was saying. She was taken to hospital with 5 fractures. That happens. That happens when people lose any conception of tolerance and democracy. One thing is to have a lively debate, and another is to hit somebody who thinks differently to you, and that's what's happening in Venezuela. As a group of journalists for our channel, we got together at a moment when our continent was going through an irreversible integration, both in terms of economics and trade and other aspects as well. We have strong blocs and alliances. We are experiencing a period of sustained growth. We've managed to reduce poverty in quite a significant way. According to the World Bank, 70 million people stopped being poor. But when you talk about democratic values, when you talk about real democracy and the guarantees for human rights, that's the context that we're in. And many of our colleagues have been working as journalists for many years in many countries in Latin America and Spain as well. And what we're seeing now is the supposed 21st century socialism that is permeating our societies. It's coming to all different countries, and it's turning into a reality that we have to address. These governments use democratic tools such as elections, the ballot boxes, to get into power. And once they get into power, they start to use all the instruments available to them and the mandate of these votes to destroy democracy from the inside. I could give you many examples of these cases, but I just want to focus on what is important to us as journalists. In February this year, our signal was turned off in Venezuela by the direct order of Nicolas Maduro. We suffered from what is called a media blackout. According to Movistar, this came from Cunatel. They are who are in charge of communications in Venezuela. Later, Mr. Maduro said that this had been a decision taken at state level, a state decision. This is a president says that one channel has to stop broadcasting, and within a few hours this channel is shut down. This makes us wonder whether this is a democratic practice or no. We also wonder how independent the judiciary is in terms of these practices. We weren't even told that we were being accused of anything. President Maduro just said that they weren't going to allow a foreign channel to come in and destabilize the psychological climate in his country. Now we wonder, shouldn't it be him looking after the psychological climate of his country? When there's a huge march of the opposition and of students that nobody could have imagined, there was a huge call, and we were the only channel to broadcast this. Let me tell you, local Venezuelan channels and other TV stations, we were broadcasting programs of entertainment. They were broadcasting cartoons or concerts. NTN 24 was the only channel that talked about these peaceful protests and the opposition. Of course, we were informing people about this huge march that was opposing these protests, as is an independent source of information. And we transmit live and through our website. And that Venezuelan government asked us to, or forced the shutdown of our channel and of our website. In February in Strasbourg, you, as two previous speakers have mentioned, discussed the serious situation of human rights in Venezuela, and you adopted a resolution that condemns the violent events such as arbitrary detention and the violation of human rights, but you explicitly also referred to our TV channel, and thank you very much for your solidarity in that respect. The same happened in the Foreign Affairs Committee of the US. There was a bipartisan decision on that, and they adopted a resolution condemning the closure of our TV channel and the violation of human rights. They recognized that there was a threat to the freedom of expression. The government is accusing our channel of being fascists and trying to promote a coup d'etat. They have spread this through diplomatic channels in all countries. These are criminalizing independent voices, and we consider this to be the hallmark of a regime which is anti-democratic. We have the right to freedom of expression. We should not be harassed for our opinions. We should be able to investigate and receive information and opinions and broadcast them across borders through any means. That's Article 19 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. I'd also like to point out that Article 11 of the EU Fundamental Charter of Fundamental Rights says that everyone has rights to freedom. This includes the right to freedom of opinion and be able to receive information without any interference of governments. You should respect the right to the freedom of the media and their pluralism. One point that is very difficult to continue to do in Venezuela. The TV channels are afraid because of what has happened to our TV channel. The channel was 50 years old and it was taken off the air. Their broadcast license wasn't renewed. That happened in February, as I said. We'd also like to point out that 34 broadcasters have been closed around the country with the same excuse. Even one of the biggest local TV channels was closing. They are accusing us of the same thing. There are 249 aggressions against journalists in public spaces in Venezuela, and this has been, and the same goes for the freedom of expression. It's constantly under attack since the 12th of February this year. We would like the dialogues between the government and the opposition to include a discussion on our broadcasting. It would be a clear signal of peace from the government of Nicolas Maduro. And I think it would be an equally important signal as releasing the political prisoners such as Leopoldo López. We are prepared to speak to them because everything we're asking for them is the starting point for a real discussion and not a parody of one. We want this to be the beginning of a transition, not to legitimize a government that is sweeping away all of our rights. We will continue to denounce the degrading and cruel treatment of people such as a guard who beat a protester while he was in a helmet and a bulletproof vest. He was beating a woman. She was then taken to prison, and she is currently being charged with criminal activity. Young people were imprisoned, and they said in front of our cameras that they had been sexually abused in prison. And they were very brave to have come to speak to us after they were freed. Those people are very brave people. There was a friend of the judge who condemned Leopoldo López, and she spoke to our colleagues in the US, said that the judge had to take the decision under pressure, under duress, because she had a daughter and she was very afraid. There are arbitrary detentions. Let me give you an example. A young person who was dragged out of his home by non-uniformed men. These men are armed but without uniforms. The father of this young person had no idea where his son was and spent nights of agony without knowing where he had gone. He didn't even have a warrant for the arrest. We continue to record visual material, such as when the National Guard fired on a young person and then they walked over him as if nothing had happened. At the end of the evening, the mother could take the son to the intensive care unit and save his life. There are 40 million television spectators in Venezuela in our region. So on their behalf, thank you very much for supporting the values such as the free press and the freedom of expression. Thank you very much.
Ich danke Ihnen sehr herzlich auch.
Thank you very much for your portrayal of the situation as well. I'll give the floor now to Mr. Salafranca.
Perdón, presidente.
Sorry, Chairman. I did put my hand up for a point, previous point, if you'd allow me to speak. Yeah, okay.
Well, we always follow the group size, and you will therefore be second to speak. We give the coordinators from the group the floor first by order of the size of the group. This is the custom in the House, but I see that Mr. Salafranca is now giving way to you, in which case, if you wish to take the floor, you have the floor.
Lo va a entender enseguida.
Well, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Brok. Thank you, Mrs. Salafranca, for allowing me to speak first, because it wasn't really about the substance of this topic which we're debating, Venezuela. I will want to speak on that the allotted time, if you like. But there's, if you like, a prior point to Mr. Brok. Have you invited other people to come here? On the agenda, we have an exchange of views on the situation in Venezuela. I don't, you can't suspect me of being sympathetic to the Venezuelan revolution there, but I mean, really, what about having all sorts of other forces? We should have various voices raised. So it's not a question of the substance, if you like, and I'm not shedding doubt on the testimony from our colleagues. Mr. Brok, have you invited or not the Venezuelan ambassador to the European Union?
Herr Kollege, ich habe die Botschafterin.
Dear colleague, I sent a written invitation to the ambassador, and that was turned down in writing by the ambassador, who was unwilling to come. But they were invited to this discussion in writing. So yes, we have done that. And I regret the fact that they are not present. Mr. Salafranca, you have the floor.
Señor Presidente. Thank you very much indeed, Chairman. I have here a copy of the reply from the embassy to our invitation to them. It's a rather aggressive, disagreeable type of missive, and really on the border, almost threatening to the European Parliament. So I'd like to thank Mrs. Machado and the Director General of 24 Hours TV channel, the two heroes of our time, as it were. They have been persecuted, treated badly. They've come under physical blows. They have had their dignity threatened. But as you can see, the flame of liberty has not been extinguished. We've heard from MP Machado. I think members here know that the European Parliament has had to deal with human rights in Venezuela back in 2007, 2008, 2009, 2010. And 2012. In each and every report approved by the European Parliament on human rights in the world, we dealt with it, and the latest resolution is February 2014. Post the dramatic images which we've had from the media, in my mind's eye, I still see the death of that young person, Jessica Muna. It was really a terrible event. And it seems that the problem with human rights has got no smaller in a region, in a country, in a continent, but it is also, in general, a problem. It's a planetary problem. But thanks here for coming to speak to us, both of our guests, very briefly, because there's not been much time. I'd like to put three questions. What should the European Union post the resolutions approved by the Parliament, apart from the statements made by the High Representative of the Commission to try and overcome the problems, as you said, via dialogue and in a peaceful fashion? What about the Episcopal statement of Venezuelan with the presence of the Vatican state dignitaries? What do you think of those? And what are the conditions which are necessary to bring about Leopoldo Lopez and other political prisoners being freed in order to get to a political dialogue which gives rise to a peaceful constitutional response in this terrible crisis? Thank you.
Möchten Sie noch mal
Sí,
reden?
sí.
Bitte, Herr Jannes.
Sí, sí, pidió la palabra al señor Brok y se...
Yes, thank you. I have to say at the outset that I'm not speaking for the Socialist S&D group because Ana Gomez, our spokesperson, is not present. That's why I'm speaking. I haven't been able to concert with her, but this treading on freedom of information and freedom of opinion. But it's important to hear what we've heard today when we look back to the 27th of February. It's of serious concern in many ways what's going on in Venezuela. It's quite obvious. And I think we still have to call on the European Parliament for some sort of a reaction. In our history here, we've already been extremely concerned for human rights, freedoms, rights, promoting defence of peace and democracy in the world. So how are we to react? I am chair of the European Parliament delegation for South America, so I have all the more responsibilities on my shoulder here. But the resolution, I think, which we had was very opportune, I would say, and as we've heard from Ms. Machado and Mrs. Gurisatti, there was one point there, approving sending out a mission from the European Parliament to Venezuela to, perhaps with more objectivity, assess and report on what's going on, having talked to parties to the Venezuelan conflict at the moment, and on that basis form its own opinion and give that to the European Parliament. This electoral term, as you know, Ms. Machado, both our guests, you know, is coming to an end in July. But we still have April, May and June. And it's not a sort of situation where we can stand on the sidelines and say the parliamentary schedule is going into recess. So I think maybe a June trip, Mr. Brok, would be a good idea so that we could go to Venezuela before this electoral term comes to an end. I've not really got much more to say, Mr. Brok, because I agree with the assessment made by Mrs. Machado. And I'm very grateful she was able to come here, and also our other guest, Mrs. Gurisatti. There's real seismic shifts going on in Venezuela, extreme polarization, very violent. Economically and politically, we see inflation, extreme lack and dearth, and as you say, there are many areas which are of extreme uncertainty, and various political prisoners, Leopoldo Lopez, 2 mayors, from the information I've got. So I would just ask you, I'm about to finish, Mr. Brok.
Termino. ¿Me permite terminar con una frase?
Just let me finish off here. I know I'm very keen on the things I talk about. I'm sorry I get carried away. It's a normal thing, Mr. Brok. But just to say, there's something I think which is not normally raised. What about Cuban presence in Venezuela? 40,000, 50,000, 70,000, 100,000 Cubans in Venezuela? Theoretically there to help with health or to teach or security, but how many and what type? I'd like to know that, because and how's it paid? Pretty much free oil to Cuba. It's not any old presence. It's totally innocent.
Yo ya he terminado ya y no lo escucho a usted.
Thank you very much.
Espero que sea la última vez que lo escucho.
You speak here for 5
Que
minutes.
se vaya usted a tomar eso que dice.
Well, take.
Have the floor. The next one is Mrs. Nates. Hopefully she can do it in 1.5 minutes. Hopefully she can do it in 1.5 minutes.
Monsieur le Président, je voudrais tout d'abord saluer.
Chairman, let me begin by welcoming Member of Parliament Machado and Mrs. Gurisatti, and I do apologise for not being present for the first part of your presentation. It may well be that you've already answered my question in that part of your presentation, and I do apologise if that's the case. My political group, the Liberals, who was involved in drafting the European Parliament resolution of February last year, which has been this year, which has been referred to, we also hold freedom of expression and human rights in high regard, as we do the rule of law in any country. Now, what I wanted to ask you was the following. At the beginning of what one might call the Chavez era, a lot of things had to be accepted because he'd improved the lot of the poorest amongst society. Now, that seemed to have been true at the beginning, but things have got worse since. So I wonder what your response is to this argument, which has been put forward on many occasions and is often put forward in order to justify authoritarian left-wing regimes.
Ja, vielen Dank. Ich möchte die Frage.
Thank you very much. Let me elaborate on Mr. Yanez's question. I'd like to ask whether or not other opposition representatives from Venezuela have been invited to speak here today. The ladies are from a fairly radical part of the opposition who are rejecting discussion with the government. Other members of the opposition, however, are of a different view. Enrique Capriles, for example, are involved in the dialogue with the government. The representative of the Vatican's also been mentioned already. Now, Mrs. Machado, you're not engaging in this dialogue. I wonder, therefore, whether you are actually interested in a peaceful end to the protests. You've mentioned that, but I wonder who these protesters are who are protesting so peacefully. What are their goals? It looks like it's the middle and upper classes. The representatives of the poor are barely involved in the protests. You've also talked about peaceful protest, but of the 40 deads, the 40 people who died, only a minority are from the opposition. Most of the victims of political violence during these protests have actually been in the pro-government protesters or in the police forces. People have been shot by snipers and killed by gunshot wounds, trying to take down barriers in the road. There have also been many other examples of deaths that back up what I'm saying. So I do think it's rather unusual that you speak of peaceful protests now. You've also talked about the difficulty in supplying the shops. We've had a lot from one side of the argument. I'd like now to give the other side of the argument. You've said that the lack of supply to shops and food and medication and what have you is actually a deliberate government strategy. If I could ask you to conclude, please.
Tannock.
Mr. Tannock now, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. And I too would like to add my greetings and support on behalf of my group, which is the European Conservative and Reformist Group. We stand in solidarity with those protesting against President Maduro's attempts to turn Venezuela into a second Cuba, effectively a kind of communist socialist dictatorship. That's, I'm sure, the ultimate aim of the man, and it's right that freedom-loving Venezuelans who believe in freedom of the press, freedom of expression, freedom of the economy. Sorry, can you have some silence, please? Want to stand up to this kind of retrograde step for a country which could otherwise be very prosperous. And I basically my question was what kind of, we've given you a lot of support in terms of our resolutions. My interest is regionally in Latin America, particularly the other democracies of Latin America, particularly your neighbour Colombia, other democratic countries like Uruguay, Brazil. Are you finding the same degree of solidarity in the national parliaments of regional Latin American countries? Are you also getting advice and support from the other democracies who don't want to see another kind of Cuban-style regime in their neighbourhood?
Jetzt zu den abschließenden Bemerkungen.
We'll have to come to our concluding remarks now because the Greek Foreign Minister is waiting outside. So I would ask you to be relatively brief, if that's possible. Mrs. Lersing, I can tell you that we invited Mrs. Figueiredo, but she was unable to come at the last minute, and she's from the opposition group that had agreed to speak to the government. So we did invite a broad spectrum of representatives here. I do often wonder how some terribly rich countries manage to end up quite so poor, however, but I don't suppose anyone can answer that question for me today. You have the floor, madam.
Ja, die können wir jeden Tag stellen. Jedenfalls, Frau Kollegin, geht es dort.
Yes, that could certainly be applied to other countries like Germany, but it's certainly better in Germany now than when the party you represent was running part of Germany.
No. Ja, ich habe gehört zu einer solchen Partei halt nicht an.
Muchísimas gracias. Esa parte no la estoy entendiendo.
Bitte schön, Sie haben das Wort.
Arranco, ok. Mucho más divertido que el Parlamento venezolano, desde luego. Yo empiezo. Comienzo. Voy a ir en el orden que fueron.
Like in the order of the questions. I'll try and be extremely brief. Yes, right. Well, first, Mr. Salafranca, you referred to the statement of the Episcopal Conference in Venezuela, the Catholic Church in Venezuela, 13th of April. Just a few points on your consensus. The basic cause of current crisis, claim of the official party of the Republic to implement the so-called Fatherland Plan, come up with a government, a totalitarian government system. That's what they said, losing its democratic profile. So the Church is very clear in what it says and its warning. And it's being done with intent. And also about poverty in the country. When Hugo Chavez came in, $9, it's more than 150. It got to 150 as a peak. Problems of direct transfers came in then. But has it allowed us to get over poverty in actual fact? Question. Or has it given rise to greater dependency in Venezuelans? Sort of direct handouts from the state. How does a country get over poverty? But it should be, I think, on the basis of education, development of abilities, talents and productive jobs, so that each Venezuelan can live on his own 2 feet and be free and overcome the crisis. This has not happened in Venezuela today. The health system has got to sort of crisis levels that there's no medicines in the hospitals, nor in the various clinics. There are children who are given birth to in public hospitals in, say, Paracay, and they are handed over in cardboard boxes. There's no possibility of dialysis or cancer treatment throughout the country. That is the reality, the situation. Interruption from the side saying this is demagoguery. Well, no, sir. You come along with the delegation and see whether it's demagoguery or not. And feel the pain of Venezuelan people. I'll go along with you and show you through the whole country. Now, also, conditions and dialogue. I'd say one thing. What the regime really wants to do is divide democratic forces. That is number one. It's not going to do that. We are a coalition. We have various points of view as a coalition, but they're not going to split us. And I would say Leopoldo Lopez and all the people involved in it, people who are fighting, we all have our own point of view. Laura Figueres can come along and we'll all talk together and see if we can get to an agreement in an approach. Because we're looking to a dialogue, Mr. Salafranca, and in that we want first to stop repression, stop sending the National Guard to disperse tear gas people who are peacefully protesting. And that's what's going on. Interruptions from the side again. Well, it may happen elsewhere, but it is to be criticized everywhere. Venezuelans have died. I'm referring, though, to my country. I'm reporting on my country. It's not a question of dividing from one party to the other. This is a general thing to be criticized. So we're calling stopping repression, freedom of political prisoners, students, Isam Simonovic, Leopoldo Lopez, and the mayors. And very important, which I think I must raise here, is the fact that sort of associations of criminal bands, paramilitary, semi-official, and Mr. Maduro said on the national television show on 5th of May, say, okay, we'll send them out to stop protests if there are others. In 15 states of the country, these bands have gone out simultaneously to attack students. So the president just gave an order, and he admitted this on national television, to these paramilitaries. Now, Mr. Yanez, the Cuban situation is crucial to the whole thing. Why? Because we can't tell you exactly how many Cubans there are in Venezuela. I ask you if in your various countries a system of immigration or identification is monitored by officials of another country. If the food ministries or the citizen security intelligence is controlled by civil servants from another country. What about armed forces? What would you think if you had generals and military officials here, Cuban for us, giving instructions to Venezuelan citizens? What would you do in your own countries if that were to happen? So this is $12 billion go out from Venezuela to Cuba every year, but there's no food. Price of oil has gone up. We don't have enough gasoline. We don't have enough petrol. But these billions of dollars go back to Cuba. We don't want a divided country. We don't want social classes, nor colour, nor race. I mean, this is what the Venezuelans say. What they're protesting against today is against the things I've mentioned, and people have died. Young people have died in their protests. They have been repressed, but we've taken it mildly. Young people who can't be maintained by their parents. They're out complaining. We see. People don't have enough to get basic, what we call our basic bread, which is a sort of tortilla. Just don't get it. You know, the staff of life is missing. So people just use these complaints as an excuse to attack them. People have been, well, we know women who have been arrested, women arrested and detained, mothers. So the regime it just doesn't stop at anything. The women, the poorest, they're good for attack. So the girl, Claudia in the media. She was a young girl, and this guard, National Guard, took off his steel helmet and just set about her. And now she's accused of 5 crimes. She was a victim. Instigation to crime and to robbery. The person who attacked her was a National Guard with his steel helmet, and he's still free and no accusations against him. And this is the sort of thing the Venezuelans are complaining to the whole world about. We are all suffering. Young people, old people, poor people, rich, men, women. It's a country which has decided to fight for democracy and freedom. And to reply to what you're saying, it's good what you're doing, but don't just listen to us. Let's call a spade, a dictatorship a dictatorship. Call it for what it is. And so come to Venezuela and see with your hearts, you feel the reality we're living through at the moment. And we are the people, despite that, have been the great promoters of freedom and democracy in our country.
Muchas gracias.
Herzlichen Dank, Frau Kollegin.
Thank you very much. You have the floor.
Obviamente no todas las preguntas las voy a contestar, no hay tiempo y como periodista.
Don't have time to reply to all these things, really, as a journalist either. The Venezuelans are going to solve our own problems, I know. But I'd like to say to Mrs. Salafranca, we, the journalists, have asked the chancelleries of your government to think about this and to support. Are you supporting Maduro or not, given the human rights situation? It's a question I would put as a journalist myself. So this mission is very important, so that we can have a balance and reality comes into dialogue and the way it's conducted. And ask that Maduro does not close down public communication channels and the media, because a debate is by all channels. People don't have a monopoly of the truth. We've got to have a reflection of what is actually happening throughout our country and society, and that has to be made out of various feed-ins, various points of view, not just one dictatorship officialist point of view. The media should be allowed to voice things, and the media which are still open should give the microphone to people who are in the opposition. They're not just representing people of the high class, of the upper class and that sort of thing. I mean, there are all sorts of people in Venezuela who are involved in protest. And they are not upper class, maybe a few, but some media middle class, and some of them the disfavored middle class. There are many people of the upper class who have actually left Venezuela, living in other countries. It's a diaspora. So people who are actually at home protesting, the people who see their future mortgaged, they don't get the daily stuff of life, bread. And that's what they're complaining against. And guarantees to citizens are not being respected. The question I would put as a journalist, looking at what happened to students in Chile, young people from the middle classes too. The 2 cases of sort of extreme action by the police, just 2. And there were trials opened against these brutal police. But 2 cases. When we complain about this, well, they just turn the switch on us and take us off air. That's the difference. Thank you.
Herzlichen Dank.
Thank you very much for that depiction of the situation. I've learned a great deal today. And what I've heard has certainly informed me in my consideration of the issue. So thank you very much for making the effort of coming all this way to speak to us. And we now come to the next item on our agenda. The Minister is on his way.
Muchas gracias a los venezolanos que están aquí hoy. Muchas gracias. Dios los bendiga. Muchas gracias. Muchas gracias, presidente.
All the best.